like to welcome you to the World Data Forum session TA1.08 on boosting data availability on agricultural land ownership from a gender's perspective. I'm Valerie Bizet, Senior Statistician in the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I will be the chair and moderator for this session. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists and presenters, let me briefly introduce you to the context, content, and the format of this session. So, as you know, achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls is central to achieving a sustainable and inclusive development. Gap in this area, however, is still massive. As of June 2022, only 40% of the gender data needed to monitor the gender-specific dimension of the SDG were effectively available. And of course, if we only look at the SDG indicator under SDG Goal 5, we can notice important discrepancies in the data availability. SDG indicator 5A1 on land, on land ownership is one which will be the interest of this session, is one of the worst indicator in terms of data availability. So this is why we bring it to the World Data Forum. This indicator is one of the two indicators that is used to monitor SDG target 5A, which aims to give women equal rights to economic resources as well as access to ownership and control over land. This target is based on evidence that access to land significantly impacts the socio-economic condition of women, particularly those that earns their livelihood from agriculture, as it directly affects their income, food security, and nutrition. The indicator is divided in two sub-indicators. The first portion, sub-indicator is the proportion of total agriculture population with ownership and secure rights over agricultural land by sex. And the second sub-indicator is the share of women among owners or right bearers of agricultural land by type of tenure. The session will focus on finding solutions to data gaps related to this indicator. In 2022, data were available for only 10 countries. In 2022, this rose to 35 countries. So the first part of this session will tell us about innovation, partnership, and collaboration that led to this increase in only 2 years. The second part of the session, however, will focus on the remaining gaps. And this is how we would like to discuss with the panel how to further boost data generation on this topic. So like I said, the first session will focus on the how. And here we have two sections. The first question will be on how census of agriculture can be transformed into data collection vehicles for 5A1, as illustrated by the experience of the Philippines and Nepal. And the second part is how statistical method can be applied to make the best existing data to generate proxy and more disaggregated information for the indicator, and using the DHS, so the Demographic and Housing Survey data to illustrate that. The second part of the session will be a panel discussion with the Chief Statistician of FAO and DHS program leadership, and they will share their thought on what kind of innovation can boost availability of gender data on agricultural land ownership, and what it will take to mainstream these into official data system. I invite you to be interactive and also try to answer those two questions that I posted in the WOVA platform. So if you have ideas on how this could happen, I invite you to share your thought in the WOVA platform or in the chat in this in the platform. I so invite you as we go to ask your question in the chat of the WOVA platform so that speakers can answer them as we go, or if we have time at the end, we could have a short window for the audience participation and ask their question directly. For those who are in presence in the room, we have someone who help us in the in-person presentation. This is Emraj, Dr. Emraj for the Central Statistic Authority of Nepal. So yeah, I see that you just introduced yourself. So without further ado, I propose that we start, since we have a very a packed agenda. So the first presenters will be Minerva Eloisa Esquiva, Deputy National Statistician at the Philippine Statistics Authority, who will talk about how we can make it happen with the case study of Philippine straight tests to integrate 5A1 data requirement in the census of agriculture. So Minerva, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Valerie. Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting the Philippine Statistics Authority's data collection experience in support of the data requirements for SDG 5A.1. Next slide. The Philippine Statistics Authority, in collaboration with the FAO Philippines, organized a technical study that covered a pretest of the SDG 5A.1 data collection instrument. The said pretest was conducted last year, specifically in July 2022 in the province of Zambales. The 2022 Census of Agriculture and Fisheries has been chosen as the data collection tool for the inclusion of the items to be used in the SDG indicator estimation. It is one of the recommended surveys as PSA as it covers agricultural operations and ownership of agricultural lands or parcels in the country. In the next slide, in the said pretest, the proposed data items were integrated into the CAF household questionnaire administered to households with at least one agricultural operator. The agricultural operator is one who has technical and economic responsibility for agricultural holding. The questions were asked for all household members 15 years old and over. Through a series of consultations and meetings, the pre-tested questions for SDG 5A.1 are shown on screen. The first question is on the possession of agricultural land by tenure status under full ownership, in owner-like possession, or in other forms of land tenure. The second question was on the use of agricultural land during the reference period that we have indicated. The third one is on the whether the household member is a bearer of a formal document for the agricultural land that was issued by the government. The next question is whether the household member's name is listed as owner or holder of the secured rights of agricultural land in the document itself. The next one is whether the household member has the right to sell the land. And the last one is whether that member has the right to bequeath that agricultural land. In the next slides, I will be sharing with you the implementation of the data collection and estimation of the indicator during the pretest versus what were recommended in the metadata. In measuring the indicator, we utilize the data on key variables such as the total agricultural population and the number of people in the agricultural population with ownership or secure rights over agricultural land. As stated in the metadata, an individual can be considered as owner or holder of secure right if they satisfy at least one of the three conditions. Well, number one, listed as owners or holders on a written legal document that testifies security of rights over agricultural land, or have the right to sell the land, or have the right to bequeath the land. In the slide, the exact formula for the computation of the proportion of agricultural population with land ownership is shown. Nasa next slide na yun. Yan. Okay. For the data collection, there will be consistency checking in all of these items to ensure that only the correct combinations of responses will be captured based on existing laws on securing rights by type of land tenure. In the next slide, the For the 2022 CAF, the questions on land ownership will be asked or captured among agricultural population 15 years old and over. But for international comparability, the estimation will be computed among those 18 years old and over. Next slide. The slide in this slide, it will show you the computation for this SDG using the pretest data. Based on the results, about 21% have ownership or secure rights over agricultural land. Among the female agricultural population, only 15% have secure rights, while we have about 29% among male agricultural population. By sex, 37% of owners or right bearers are females. We are also showing here the computation of land ownership by females by tenure status. Next slide. During the pretest, SDG indicators were asked among those who reported that they own agricultural land regardless of the tenure status. The tenure status was grouped into three categories as I have mentioned a while ago. Fully owned, owner-like, and other tenures. But for the actual census, which will be conducted in September, October this year, we revised the categories to exclude those under the community-based forest management agreement, tenanted, and leased, rented for asking the SDG questions. So on the right, the third column, you can see that the first three items will be the ones that will be proceeding to the questions on SDG. But the last three will already skip to the next question. Next slide. Based on SDG metadata, the data disaggregation by legal type of document is recommended. However, for the pretest, to simplify and reduce the interview time for the census, we drop the question on the type of legal document and change it to a yes or no question. That is whether there was a formal document for ownership and if the household member's name is listed on it. The questions used in the pretest are being reviewed now to consider the national situation, and thus this particular disaggregation by type of document may or may not be provided for the 2022 census. The next one, some reported tenure status, particularly those with verbal agreements only or do not have the land titles yet, were unsure if they have the right to sell and or bequeath. Further probing is needed in such cases, and the enumerator may add details in the remarks portion of the questionnaire to support the responses that they will be providing. The next slide, the target respondent for the CAF is any responsible adult member of the household. In asking the questions, enumerators will have to be advised to ask each of the household members directly if they are available at the time of visit or do callbacks if they are not available during that visit. However, we all know that callbacks for census have cost and time implications. Hence, proxy respondent approach may still be commonly adopted. Next slide. As of this date, the PSA proposes the monitoring of SDG 5A1 indicators through two major statistical undertakings of the office. The first one is the 2022 Census of Agriculture and Fisheries, which will be conducted this year. This will serve as our benchmark for the collection of the indicator in the Philippines. It is noted here, however, that the 2022 Census of Agriculture and Fisheries will be a sample-based census. The next conduct of the census will be in 2033. In between the conduct of the census, the SDG indicators are also recommended to be included in our community-based monitoring system. However, the coverage of the community-based monitoring system will only include those cities and municipalities in the country that opted to join the said undertaking. Based on the law, the CBMS or the Community-Based Monitoring System is to be conducted every 3 years, and the PSA is also the lead agency responsible for providing technical assistance to these local government units. That ends my presentation. Thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Minerva. We're looking forward to see the outcome of the upcoming census and the first baseline data you will collect on 5A1. I would like to invite our next speaker, Mahesh Kumar Sudebi, which is the director of the Agriculture Census and Service section at the Nepal Central Bureau of Statistics. So Mahesh, you have the floor. Although I don't see him now. Yes, okay.
Can you see?
Yes, we can see it. If you could put it in presentation mode. Excellent.
Can you continue or wait?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning to everybody. My name is Mahesh Subedi. I'm from National Statistics Office of Nepal. I'm mainly talking about ownership, women's ownership of agricultural land in Nepal. So from our last population census 2021, we could see that still 60% households are engaged in agriculture in Nepal, and about 65% of economically active women are working in agriculture. So about one fourth of the GDP is contributed by the agriculture sectors. So the population also included a question about the land ownership or asset ownership of women. So about the 23.8% of household have ownership of land or housings in the name of members of household member, in the name of female members of the household. But this is in household level. But the real-time data of women's ownership of land, we can get it from the Department of Land Management and Archives. So the share of women with ownership of land ownership among the total owner of the land is about 38%. 38%. And, but we still have a lack of the data availability for SDG 5A1. So before the agriculture census, but from the MNST global data set, we could see that about that the global data set of in they use the DHS data, and we could see that
Hello, Mahesh. I think we cannot hear you anymore. Let's give Mahesh a few seconds for, seems like there's connection issue. Mahesh, can you hear us?
Valerie, I think Mahesh's internet is unstable. Maybe we can let the next speaker make a speech first, and then we let Mahesh
Go back.
make a speech. Okay.
Okay, no problem. So we will move on to the next section of the first part of this session. That will focus on innovation to estimate ZJ indicator 5A1 based on incomplete data using the Demographic and Health Survey Program. So I will invite Margarita Guerrero from FAO as a senior consultant at the FAO to present her thought on this. Let me share your screen for you. Please go ahead.
I actually don't see the screen, but I will start because it's frozen on Mahesh's one.
Okay.
I will start. I will be presenting on the methodology which on Mahesh's screen speaks about on indirect estimates using demographic and health survey. How were these done? Okay. And let me start by saying why is the methodology important? And I think part of the answer is because it shows the way to an approach for using non-standard agricultural-based household survey data to produce approximate measures for indicators. For one, the standard DHS is not designed to specifically collect data for SDG 5A1, but its questionnaires and structures tend to be consistent across countries. Thank you, Valerie. Now I see it. Next, it collects individual level data for both men and women, or at least it has the potential to do so, to be explained later. It includes key questions on employment and on individual land ownership, both of which are important for computing SG 5A1. Next slide, please. Because the DHS is not designed to specifically collect data for 5A1, it has limitations. Its limitations, as shown on the screen, has to do first with the sample, because it does not cover the whole adult population, limiting itself typically to women of ages 15 to 49 and to men of ages 15 to 49 or 59. Second, although it is questions on individual land ownership, these are not specific to agricultural land. Questions on agricultural land ownership were asked at the household level. And third, some of the questions relevant for 5A1 differ slightly in the two questionnaires. And most important of this would have to do with difficulties posed by how questions are asked in employment for men. Next slide, please. But nevertheless, if given the data that's available there, what can we use? The starting point is to call out the subsample from the whole sample that would be relevant for the computation. So you start there. Basically, we need to first identify the subset of sample households that collect data for both women and men. And second, apply the criteria for identifying agricultural households. And this is where it becomes a little bit complicated, as I mentioned earlier, because the data to identify self-employed in agriculture for men is indirect. It's based on occupational codes, not on the standard employment status question. Well, this is an additional area for possible improvement then. And thirdly, once you identify agricultural households, then you are able to identify the agricultural population from whom data on agricultural land ownership will be collected or at least computed. Next slide, please. Questions on land ownership are asked at both the household level and at the individual level. At the individual level, the questions on land ownership aim to collect data on reported ownership and formally documented ownership. There are no questions to collect data on ownership based on alienation rights, which Minerva had actually explained in her presentation. Next slide, please. In particular, the household level question has the right focus on agricultural land, but does not provide data on individual ownership, while the individual level questions in the DHS are individual level, but are too broad in terms of type of land. They include both agriculture and non-agricultural land. So in the DHS, in the end, we consider agricultural landowners as individuals who declare being owners of land in the individual questionnaire and at the same time are part of a household that has declared owning agricultural land in particular. Next slide, please. So in summary, the DHS collects data on documented ownership and reported ownership, but not, next slide, please, on alienation rights. So the proxy measures that we're talking about here that Mahesh had briefly presented for Nepal are based on reported ownership, which is another limitation. Again, this would be an area that we might be able to improve using DHS. Next slide, please, Valerie. Computing 5A1 from available data. So we take care of some of the complications that arise because they're not exact or they might be incomplete, but it can be done. First, identify, as I said earlier, the subsample of households where both men and women have been interviewed. Next, step 2, next slide. We then identify the people who are self-employed in agriculture because this is how you would identify agricultural households relevant to computation of the indicator. As I mentioned earlier, this becomes a little bit complicated because the question asked for men are based on occupational codes or grouped occupation. Then it's something that since it's approximate measures, we do approximations of. Next slide, please. Step 3, you identify the agricultural households and then assign the agricultural population status to all the interviewed adults living in those households. Minerva had mentioned that this would be, according to metadata, those who are 18 years old or over for purposes of computation of SDG 5A1. Next slide, please. And the last step, identify who in the agricultural population has reported ownership of agricultural land. As mentioned earlier, you need to combine information from the individual questionnaire and the household questionnaire. The household questionnaire asks about ownership in the household of any type of agricultural land. And then you look at individuals for such households who say that they own either agricultural or non-agricultural land. So indirectly, this is an approximation of individual agricultural landowners. Well, I try to keep within my time limit, and that's it in a nutshell, this particular methodology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margarita. I will invite now representing FAO, Irene Toma, gender statistic expert and researcher. Irene will present us some work that has been done in terms of small area estimation using DHS data to come up with more disaggregated information on 5A1 following what Marge has just presented. Irene, you have the floor.
Thank you, Valerie. Can you see the presentation? I guess you can. Thank you. So, hello, everyone. Let's get into it. So, I'm presenting here a study that we did that combines two works that FAO has been doing in terms of boosting data availability for SDG indicators in general and 5A1 in particular. So on the one hand, as Marge has just presented, we've been doing many activities to boost the data availability at the country level, the global data availability of 5A1. And one of these activities is to develop proxy methodologies for countries before they are able to integrate the official metadata in their data collections. And on the other hand, FAO has also been doing a lot of work in terms of small area estimation techniques applied to SDG indicators. So in this study, we've combined these two work, and we've used the proxy estimation based on 2016 Nepal DHS as our starting point for 5A1. And then we applied small area estimation techniques to be able to produce more reliable district level estimates. Why we decided to do this? The DHS is not designed to be representative at the district level, but it is representative at higher levels of geographical disaggregation, such as province, national level, urban, rural, and so on. And Nepal has a high number of districts. So when we initially tried to produce estimates at the district level directly, we did not reach, like a satisfactory level of precision. As you can see here, we consider a good level of precision when the coefficient of variation is below 16. And you can see here that in the chart, we didn't have many districts that were below 16. Most of them were, yellow and red or out of sample. So in this case, we could see that the smaller estimation techniques could help in increasing this precision for obtaining estimates at the district level. Moreover, Nepal also had a population and housing census from 2011 that could act as an auxiliary data source for this exercise. We decided to use an area level model over a unit level model, mainly because we did not have access to the microdata of the census, but we did have access to the census tables with district aggregated household level and individual level variables that we could use to implement our model, our area level model. And as it was presented before, indicator 5A1 has two sub-indicators, but effectively, with the disaggregation between total population, women and men, there are four models that we needed to implement. For 5A1A, we have 3 total women and men, and then we have 5A1B. And through a stepwise regression, we selected 4 distinct sets of auxiliary variables for each of these modules, taking variables from the population and housing census, as well as other geospatial variables from other various sources. Then we applied for each of them the area level estimation, small area estimation using the Fay-Harriott model. And here you can see the results in terms of increased precision. So in these 4, you can see that the dark blue dots are the coefficients of variations of the direct estimates that are for each district. So you can see they were quite high. But then after the model-based coefficients of variations have been decreased by a lot. So we can say that we were able to increase the precision of the district level estimates of 5A1. Moving on, I'm gonna show you quickly what it looks like in a map. So at the top, we have the direct estimates for sub-indicator A of 5A1 for the total population. And at the bottom, we have the model-based. We can also here see that the realized residuals and the random effects follow the expected theoretical distribution with minimal deviations in the tails, and more or less the same can be said for all 4 models. And also what I would like to point out here is that we had some districts that were out of sample, the gray ones. We did not have enough observations to produce a direct estimate. But then with the small area estimation, we were able to. You'll notice that 2 of them remain gray. And the reason is that they were not sampled in the DHS to begin with. It is still technically possible to estimate them with this technique. But for this iteration of the study, we decided to stick to the districts that were in the DHS to begin with. For future iterations, it's definitely possible to produce estimates for those 2. So this is 5A1A total, and I'm going to quickly show you 5A1A for the women. Similar situation, as you can see, we produced estimates for those who were out of sample and increased the precision of others. And same for men. I'm going to be a little bit quick and 5A1B. So these were the 4. And just to conclude my presentation, this study is an example how boosting the availability of SDG indicator at the global level through, for example, the proxy methodologies can also create an opportunities for countries to produce more inclusive SDG data through smaller estimation techniques that can produce timely, granular, disaggregated estimates at a relatively low cost. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Renani. Very interesting. I would like now to try to give back the floor to Mahesh. Mahesh, are you here?
Yes, thank you.
Do you want me to share your slide just in case this has an impact on the connection?
Yeah, I think that would be better. That would be better.
Okay.
I lost from this.
So we were just slide 2, I believe. Here? Just tell me which slide.
Yeah, please go down with
here.
Actually, I will continue from here. So the Department of Land Management and the archive shows that about 38% women have the ownership of land among the total land owners, but it includes both agriculture and non-agricultural land. This is the real-time data from the administrative sources. So next slide, please. And but we still have the lack of the data for 5A1 and before the agriculture census, but the SDG Global Dataset estimated the 5A1 from the DHS data in 2016. So this shows about 39% of women have the agricultural lands ownership among the total owners of the agricultural lands, but it has the age limitation of 15 to 49 years of men and women's age. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we started increasing relevant question in our agriculture census. So next slide, please. So we followed the 5A1 methodology or the WCA 2020 methodology concept and definition to define the agriculture household or the agriculture farm populations. So in agriculture census questionnaire, we included the land tenure types of holding for each parcel, that for the 5A1B by tenure types. Next question. Next slide, please. And for the age sex-wise estimations of 5A1A and A, and we have included the age and sex of each and every member of the household members. But we asked specific questions in specific questions of land ownership in the last column of the household. This demographic questionnaire. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we asked, does name hold an official document in his or her name certifying ownership of legal access to agricultural lands for each household member of age 16 and above? Because in case of Nepal, if a person is 16 years of age and above, they can hold land ownerships. So this question is specifically included to capture the land ownership of agricultural lands for each and every household members. So please, next slide, please. And the special case in Nepal that among the 3 proxies of land ownerships, we use the formal documentation or the proxy ones. So presence of legally recognized document in the name of the individuals. Because in case of Nepal, if a person has a formal documentation, it also holds the alienation rights. So we use the proxy ones methods to capture the land ownership of the male and females of age 16 and above. So next slide, please. So based on the preliminary results of the census, now we could get the indicators for 5A1 for A for women's it is 21.6%, and 5A1A for men, it is 44.1%, and the 5A1B, it is 34.7%. So when we compare this figure with the administrative data of land management and archive, that was 38%, because that captured both agricultural land and non-agricultural land, and it is a bit lower, and because it is only confined on the agricultural land ownerships, so it seems quite reasonable. So, but we still have to do a minor weight adjustment. So after that, we will have the final results. So it may change a bit, but still the figures seems very reasonable. So the last slide, please. So the main challenges we face is to include this questionnaire in the census question. Obviously, it makes the questionnaire very longer, and it cost and all the cost and burden, but to both to the respondent and the organizations. And the main limitation is that we use the self-reported ownership by a proxy respondent. Just one respondent responded or says all the household members' information. So this is one of the main limitations that generally we do in other surveys also. Could be this is one of the limitations. And the agricultural land with a non-document or non-registered long-term leads are excluded from the questionnaire. So with this some challenge and limitations, finally we are now able to get the 5A1 indicator from agriculture census data. Now in Nepal, for the first time, we are having the 5A1 indicator at least at the census year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh. And I'm glad that we managed to fix this connection problem and hear the experience of Nepal on this. It's one of the first countries that collect this information in census of agriculture. So it set the tone for other countries. I would like now to go to the next part of this session, which is a panel discussion on what else can we do to boost the data. We had originally 3 speakers. Unfortunately, Papa Sek, Chief Statistician of UN Women, had canceled at the last minute due to health issue, and he apologized for not joining us. But we still have 2 very distinguished participants, panelists. We have Pietro Gennari, Chief Statistician of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, which is the custodian agency for the indicator 5A1. And we have Livia Montana, which is the Deputy Director of the DHS program, so the Demographic and Health Survey Program. Like I presented at the beginning, we had 2 general questions we would like to answer for this panel, but we have a specific question for our panelists. And I will start first with Livia. Livia, countries were invited to validate the initial result of the methodology for generating proxy estimate for SDG indicator 5A1 from the DHS data in a series of webinar FAO UN Women and the DHS program organized. Countries largely welcome the availability of a method that has the potential to fill data gaps. The DHS program, with yourself in the lead, started exploring ways in which the DHS could better integrate estimation of the indicator. Keeping the momentum of this work, could you let us know the progress so far in this exploration? What are the immediate possibilities and what are longer-term potential action in this direction for the DHS? Livia, I invite you to
Thank you.
answer this
Thank you
question.
so much. And thank you for having me in this meeting. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person. So with the DHS program, as you know, we are a global program, we have a very standardized approach to our data collection and also to our tabulations and reports that we publish. So we participated in some of those webinars that were mentioned. And I think in general, we're very enthusiastic about the possibility of including these proxy indicators as part of the tabulations, as has been mentioned and described in the earlier presentations. These are questions that are in the DHS that have been asked for, I think, quite a while. And so even retrospectively, it's possible to go back and calculate these proxy indicators. Going forward, so for the DHS, we're a global program, as I mentioned. We are funded centrally by USAID. But each survey, each country is, it's a country-owned and country-led survey. And so we also countries to include this in their final reports. But I want to emphasize that, you know, I think getting the buy-in from the countries is also going to be critical. For us, we're ending the 8th round of the DHS program very soon. We have about 62 surveys that will be completed during these 5 to 7 years of this program. We have a little extra time because of the pandemic. And then we'll start the 9th round of the survey. And so at present, we are looking at creating a standard table for the final report that would include the proxy indicators. We also have a separate tabulation, one table where we present all of the SDGs that are available in the survey. Right now, there's about 30 SDGs that we collect data on in the DHS. So I think I won't take more time, but just to say that we're enthusiastic and supportive of this effort, and we are moving towards looking at how we can incorporate the proxy indicators in our standard offerings for countries to adopt. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. This is a very good news, and with potentially 62 new country reporting in the 8th round of the DHS, this is also good news in terms of boosting data availability. I would now have a question for Pietro Gennari. This session has focused on data production and estimation to fill gender data gap on agricultural land ownership, highlighting the result of collaborative and innovative technical work to close that gap. Of course, the ultimate goal is to use the data for policy and program implementation, assessment, and formulation. We know, however, that there also is a data use gap issue for gender data. Can you share your insight how boosting data use also boosts data production, and what priority action can country take to boost data use, including on agricultural land ownership and gender equality? Pietro, you have the floor. You're muted.
Sorry about that. It's my microphone is.
We can hear you. We can hear you now.
Okay. So again, thank you, Valerie, Madam Chair, and good morning to all the people that are present in the room. I know that there is quite a number of people that are attending in presence, and to all those that are connected remotely, wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good night, as is 4 o'clock in the morning in Italy. So it's quite a challenge to follow this session. So the question is a very important question for us. because we think that boosting data use indeed goes hand in hand with boosting also data production. So a way, if these two things goes hand in hand, and when data are being effectively used by policy and decision makers, more resources are provided to data production, and this fosters a virtuous cycle of more and better data being used and produced. And we have a good example of this in the increase of use of health-related data during the pandemic period, which catalyzed an increased investment in related data collection and capacity development efforts, as we all could testify during the last recent period of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, however, in a way, there has been a shift of resources with the COVID pandemic away from other sectors in order to have more data on health-related data. And so now, however, the situation of health-related data is the exception. And most common scenario is the opposite. Data are not being adequately used, resources are cut, and we find ourselves in a vicious cycle of stagnation of data availability and data quality. And this explains the efforts that FAO has done to try to find the proxy measures that could measure the land ownership of women, even if we didn't have the right instruments to measure this indicator. So the important question is how and what can we do to boost the data use? First, we need to recognize that data users are a very diversified and heterogeneous group. Data users include everyone from policymakers to journalists, from academic and research institutions to the private sector and the public at large. Therefore, we should adopt a tailored approach for addressing the data needs of specific user groups. For example, if we take the policymakers, we need strong advocacy campaigns to help them realize that investing in data has huge multiplier effects. And there has been recent studies and analysis that has shown that every dollar invested in data system creates an average of $32 in economic benefits. This is a powerful message that we can deliver to policymakers. And policymakers also need the data that are relevant so that they can use for the policy issues at hand that they have to tackle with. Data that are timely in order to take prompt corrective actions on these policy issues, and that are sufficiently disaggregated to better target policy interventions. For the other groups, like academics and private sector or public sector analysts, we should promote open data and especially facilitate access to microdata, as FAO has done, establishing the Food and Agriculture Microdata Catalog, helping them to conduct in-depth policy analysis that can be performed and shared with the public, with the journalists, with the policymakers, and that are usually not performed by NSOs. In parallel, we should incentivize data use by launching data use grant competitions for researchers, for example. And this has been an experience that we have done together with other organizations like the World Bank in some of our projects recently. Other users that are in the middle stages, the middle steps of the data value chain, such as journalists, which have a critical role in disseminating news, would benefit from statistical literacy initiatives that are more effectively delivered by NSOs, which, however, usually do not have the analytical capacity to transform data into information and knowledge that can be then transferred to the non-expert users. For this purpose, international organizations should progressively integrate data literacy and the data analytics training components into large statistical capacity development programs for NSOs. to improve their dissemination culture. So especially the fact that it's important to disseminate as much as possible microdata. I don't keep this data buried in the computer of their institution, and their analytical capacity. As I said before, because analytical capacity is essential to transform maybe data that are not so interesting in relevant information and in knowledge for the non-expert users. We also need NSOs themselves to invest much more on data communication by producing analytical reports, headline indicators, and press releases with policy-oriented key messages, all of which can add value to the underlying data that the NSOs collect. And I think that also the international organization have a role in that. As I said, we can, in our capacity development programs, we can introduce elements to boost the analytical capacity of NSOs. And I want to make just two examples that FAO has experimented recently. First of all, FAO has developed new tools to automate progress assessments and therefore help countries improve the analytical content of an SDG-related national progress report. And this allows them to analyze the possibility that the country will achieve the SDG targets and goals. And this is a very important information for the public and for the policymakers to understand if they have to accelerate the interventions to make sure that these targets and goals can be achieved. At the same time, as we have seen in one of the presentations of Irene, FAO has invested massively in developing a suite of guidance document to support the production and use of disaggregated data for the SDGs. And this enhanced the availability of subnational level data and for specific population group, which allows country to design effective targeted intervention that address the problems of different areas in the countries and different population groups. So I stop here. I think I have covered more or less all the groups that are part of the varied heterogeneous group of data users. Thank you.
Thank you, Pietro. We have only 3 minutes for further question for the panel. I see there's one question from Shama Deepali that regards how can we close the gap between local achievement and measuring them, because the measurement may be not timely enough to measure the quick or rapid change that are happening at the local level. I don't know, maybe I will give that question to Pietro. How can we try to measure as much as possible the local achievement as they go?
Well, as we have seen, the module that has been developed by FAO and other international institutions is a very simple module that includes 5 relevant questions, and that can be easily included in both national and internationally led household surveys without any additional costs de facto. So this is a really a straightforward action, what is called a low-hanging fruit with marginal associated cost. And so both at the country level, NSO should take action to include the module in upcoming surveys that are conducted at country level, organized by national statistical offices, part of the national statistical program, and custodian agencies support international surveys, such as we have seen that DHS that has already some of these questions, and I think it would take very little to complete the module and include also some of the questions that are essential to have not a proxy measure, but a real measure of the tenure rights and access to land of women. And this will help to include the 5A1 module in future survey rounds, help us to monitor the progress towards this target before 2030. We are already halfway through, and we have very few countries that have taken this step so far. And this is the first and most important step that we need to take to increase and boost the availability of 5A1 data.
Thank you. And also combined with the techniques that, the small area techniques that also can help us have subnational estimate and measure more the changes at the local level, like you mentioned in your intervention, as well as in Irine's presentation. Unfortunately, it's all the time we have today. I invite all the participants, if you have additional questions, to ask them in the WOVA platform, and we will follow up with the various presenters and speakers so that you receive answer to them. As a closing remark, I would just like to say that during this session, we highlighted some innovation, collaboration, and partnership that have increased or can further boost the availability of data for agricultural land ownership from a gender's perspective. This is really important as we only have 12 years left in the achievement of the SDG, to have better data to make decisions that will help us achieve SDG target 5A1. I thank you everybody for your attention and your participation. Like I said, I invite you to continue to interact with us, and I wish you a nice end of the World Data Forum. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you
so much for all the speakers' excellent speech. I think that's the end of our meeting. Thank you.